My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 32 years old, a senior analyst at Blackwood Capital, one of the most ruthless private equity firms on the planet. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp, I will walk into the 50th floor boardroom of my family's company, Vance Biotherapeutics, to present my final findings on our multi-billion-dollar acquisition deal. My father, the company's celebrated CEO, and my brother, the heir-apparent COO, will be waiting for me. Only they have no idea that the anonymous, stone-cold analyst whose report will either make them billionaires or utterly destroy them is the daughter they wrote off as a failure a decade ago. They see me as a rounding error in their grand equation of success. They're about to learn a brutal lesson in advanced mathematics.
Before I dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. Hit that like button, and if you're new here, subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Now let me take you back to how this all began.
The Vance family did not live in a home. We inhabited a corporate headquarters with bedrooms. Our world, headquartered in the most exclusive neighborhood of Boston's Beacon Hill, was one of old money, intellectual arrogance, and a ruthless devotion to the family brand. My father, Dr. Robert Vance, was a legitimate titan of the biotech industry, a Nobel shortlisted geneticist who had built his company on a foundation of sheer, uncompromising brilliance. He was a man who viewed emotion as a correctable data flaw and saw every human interaction as a transaction to be won. His son, my older brother Andrew Vance, was his greatest creation. Andrew was born with a full head of hair and a perfect smile, and my father spent the next 30 years polishing him into the ideal corporate heir. With his Harvard MBA and effortless charm, Andrew was the company's public face, the charismatic COO who could sell our father's complex science to even the most skeptical investors. He was the golden child, the crown prince, the living embodiment of the Vance legacy. And I, Eleanor, was the family's greatest disappointment. From birth, I was a bug in their perfect code. I was quiet where Andrew was loud, analytical where he was impulsive. I didn't have my father's sweeping, visionary intellect or my brother's social grace. I had something they found far less useful, an obsessive, almost painful attention to detail. I saw the world not in grand gestures, but in tiny, interlocking patterns. In our family, this was not a skill, it was a handicap. A stark memory from my teenage years perfectly illustrates this chasm. At the regional science fair, Andrew presented a flashy, volcano-like model demonstrating a theoretical drug delivery system. It was all style, no substance, using colored water and baking soda. It won first place. I presented a meticulously researched statistical analysis of protein folding, complete with hundreds of pages of data I had compiled myself. My father patted me on the head and called it a cute little numbers project. Later, I overheard him telling a colleague, "Andrew thinks in concepts. Eleanor just counts things. One is a leader, the other is a librarian." This intellectual snobbery defined my upbringing. Andrew's every move was celebrated. Mine were tolerated. When it came time for college, he sailed into Harvard, a path paved by my father's connections and a hefty donation to the biochemistry department. I, through my own relentless work, was awarded a full fellowship to a prestigious PhD program in computational biology at MIT. For 2 years, I was free. I was in a world where my librarian mind was a superpower, where data was beautiful and logic was king. It was the happiest I had ever been. The event that shattered this brief idyll wasn't dramatic. It was brutally clinical, a hostile takeover of my future. I was home for Christmas during my 3rd year of study when the family business hit a snag. Andrew, in a bid to prove his own visionary genius, had spearheaded the acquisition of a small German biotech firm without proper due diligence. The firm was a house of cards, its patents worthless. The deal collapsed, leaving Vance Biotherapeutics exposed to a 9-figure loss and, worse, public humiliation. My father convened a family meeting in his study, the room where all corporate and familial executions took place. He didn't yell at Andrew. He saw no value in punishing a faulty asset that was still essential to the brand. Instead, he laid out a recovery plan with the dispassionate air of a general moving pieces on a map. The losses must be offset before our quarterly earnings call, he stated, looking directly at me. We need to show a significant reduction in long-term liabilities and projected expenditures. He pulled out a file. Inside were the documents for the educational trust my maternal grandparents had established for me, a substantial fund I used to supplement my fellowship and cover my living expenses. I've run the numbers, my father said. The most efficient path forward is to liquidate this trust. We will absorb the capital back into the primary family holdings, which will offset a portion of Andrew's loss on the books. It's a strategic reallocation of assets. The room fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face.
What? No.
That's my PhD fund. I can't finish my research without it. It's everything. Don't be sentimental, Eleanor, my mother said coolly from her armchair. Your father is trying to save the family's reputation. Your little school project is hardly a priority right now. But it's not a school project. It's my entire future. I pleaded, turning to Andrew. Andrew, say something. Andrew, my brother, the cause of this entire disaster, simply stared at a fixed point on the Persian rug. Dad's right, Ellie, he mumbled, refusing to meet my eyes. We have to protect the company. It's for the good of the family. I am the family, I cried out, my voice cracking. It was left for me. My father closed the file with a soft, final thud. The decision has been made, he said, his voice leaving no room for appeal. Your particular line of research has a statistically low probability of generating significant revenue. Andrew's role as the future CEO is infinitely more valuable to the Vance legacy. We are sacrificing a speculative asset to protect a core one. It's the most logical move. You should be able to appreciate the math. They took my future to pay for my brother's mistake. The trust was liquidated the next day. I was forced to withdraw from MIT. The humiliation was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest. I eventually cobbled together enough credits to graduate from a less prestigious state university, working 2 jobs to pay for IT. To owe my family, my story was over. I had been a minor line item, and I had been written off the books. They stopped asking about my career, my life. I was a failed investment, a ghost haunting the edges of their perfect family portrait. They had no idea I was quietly, methodically, planning a hostile takeover of my own. After graduation, I vanished into the anonymous world of corporate finance. My mind, which they had dismissed, was perfectly suited for the cold, brutal logic of the market. I learned to see the weaknesses in a company's balance sheet, the lies hidden in their quarterly reports. I became an expert at financial forensics. 2 years ago, I was poached by Blackwood Capital, a private equity firm that was essentially a wolf pack in bespoke suits. They didn't care about my pedigree. They cared about my results. They cared that I could walk into a company and, in 6 months, find every skeleton in every closet. And then, the ultimate skeleton key landed on my desk. The prospectus for a potential acquisition of Vance Biotherapeutics, my moment had arrived. I volunteered to lead the due diligence, my last name raising no alarms in a firm that valued performance over bloodlines. For 6 months, I have been a ghost in my own family's machine, granted unlimited access to their deepest secrets. They see me as a faceless analyst from Blackwood. They have no idea I am the daughter they broke, come back to collect on a debt they don't even remember incurring. But I knew that to truly understand the scale of their corruption, I needed to talk to the other ghost my father had created. Dr. Eris Thorne was the co-founder of Vance Biotherapeutics, the quiet, ethical genius who had been my father's partner for 20 years. 15 years ago, he had abruptly retired, vanishing from the public eye. The official story was that he'd left to pursue personal research. I suspected he'd been pushed out. I had to find him. IT wasn't easy. He lived under a different name in a remote corner of Vermont, a man actively trying to be forgotten. I used my skills in data analysis, not on companies, but on people, tracing old property records and obscure academic citations. I finally found him in a small, weathered house filled with books and the scent of wood smoke. He was frail, his body weakened by illness, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He knew who I was the moment I introduced myself. Eleanor Vance, he said, his voice a dry whisper. I wondered if you'd ever come. You have your father's ambition, but your grandfather's eyes. The honest ones. I spent 2 hours laying out my story, my plan. I told him about the stolen trust fund, about my position at Blackwood, about my intention to use the acquisition as a weapon. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. You want to ruin him, he stated when I finished. It wasn't a question. I want justice, I replied. For what he did to me, and for whatever he did to you. A sad smile touched his lips. Justice is a rare element, Eleanor. What Robert did to me was far worse than simply pushing me out of the company. He forced me to become complicit in his original sin. He then told me the story that would become the core of my revenge. The story of Vancitrex, the company's blockbuster drug, the miracle cure for a rare autoimmune disorder that had made them all billionaires. Its approval by the FDA 15 years ago had been hailed as a triumph of modern science. According to Eris, it was a triumph of fraud. The final clinical trial, the results were not what we hoped for, Eris confessed, his voice heavy with the burden of his long-held secret. The drug worked, but it had a dark side. In a small but statistically significant subset of patients, it caused rapid, irreversible neurological damage. It would have meant years of delays, a complete reformulation. The company would have gone bankrupt. My father, ever the pragmatist, had made a decision. He ordered the trial data to be sanitized. Patients who showed adverse effects were scrubbed from the final report. Efficacy numbers were inflated. A few key charts were completely fabricated. I fought him, Eris said, his eyes hollow. I told him it was monstrous, that we had a duty to report the truth. He gave me an ultimatum. Either I sign a non-disclosure agreement so ironclad it could survive a nuclear blast and take a quiet buyout, or he would destroy me. He would fabricate evidence that I had been the one to tamper with the data, that I had tried to sabotage the company. He would have used his army of lawyers to bury me and my reputation forever. Eris, to protect his name and what was left of his life's work, had chosen silence. But he had kept a copy of everything. The original, untampered data logs. The falsified reports submitted to the FDA. And the internal memos, signed by my father, explicitly ordering the data optimization. He led me to a fireproof safe and pulled out an encrypted hard drive. This is my legacy, Eleanor, he said, his hand trembling slightly as he held it out to me. My name is on those patents. My reputation is tied to that drug. Releasing this information will not only expose me to lawsuits and public disgrace, it will negate every good thing I ever accomplished in my life. It is the sacrifice of my entire identity. He placed the drive in my palm. It felt heavier than any object I had ever held. He built his empire on a lie that has likely harmed thousands of people. He built it on my silence. Now, you must use it to build his ruin. This was the heart of my plan. I had the foundational crime. Eris's evidence was the historical bombshell. Now I just needed to connect it to the present day. I returned to Blackwood with a renewed, almost terrifying focus. The due diligence process gave me the perfect cover. I played my role as the impartial analyst flawlessly. My preliminary reports were positive, even glowing. I praised the company's financials, their market strategy. I let my father and brother believe the deal was a formality. They grew comfortable, arrogant. Andrew even had the audacity to take me out for a patronizing lunch during the process, where he offered me a mid-level job, Advanced Biotherapeutics, after the acquisition. You're a good numbers cruncher, Ellie, he'd said with a wink. We could use you. I had smiled and said I would consider it. Meanwhile, my team and I were digging. With Eris's data as our blueprint, we knew exactly what to look for. And we found it. We found that the company's new pipeline of drugs, the very assets Blackwood was about to pay billions for, were being pushed through development using the same fraudulent methods. The same pattern of sanitizing data, the same statistical impossibilities. The rot had not been contained. It had metastasized. It was the company's entire business model. MY final report was ready. It was not a simple document. It was a narrative of corporate sociopathy, told through balance sheets and clinical trial data. It was a ticking time bomb, and I had set the timer for 9 a.m. in my father's boardroom. The night before the meeting, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I thought of the young girl who cried in her room after being told her dreams were a poor investment. I thought of the student who had to give up her place at MIT. I thought of the woman who had spent the last decade sublimating her pain into a relentless, single-minded ambition. My father had taught me that business was war. He had taught me that the person with the best data always wins. Tomorrow, I would prove him right. The 50th floor boardroom of Vance Biotherapeutics was designed to intimidate. It was a symphony of polished granite, gleaming steel, and dark, imposing mahogany, all framed by a breathtaking panoramic view of the Boston skyline. It was a room that whispered of power, of deals made and fortunes won. It was the heart of my father's empire, and I was about to perform open-heart surgery with a chainsaw. I arrived exactly 15 minutes early, my team of junior analysts trailing behind me like a phalanx. I was a stranger in my own father's kingdom. The senior executives who had known me as a quiet, awkward teenager now greeted me with a deferential respect reserved for the emissaries of Blackwood Capital. They called me Ms. Vance, their eyes filled with the avarice of men about to become incomprehensibly rich. The dramatic irony was so thick, it was almost suffocating. My father, Robert, and my brother, Andrew, made their grand entrance at 8:55 a.m. They were the conquering heroes, greeted with a round of applause from their board members. My father was in his element, exuding an aura of intellectual superiority and absolute control. Andrew was by his side, the perfect corporate prince, his smile as bright and empty as his promises. My father's gaze swept over me, a brief flicker of acknowledgement for the woman who had paved the way for this glorious day. There was no recognition in his eyes. He saw a tool, an instrument that had served its purpose. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice magnanimous. "Excellent work on the preliminary diligence. Thorough. We're all very pleased." "I aim to be thorough, Dr. Vance," I replied, my voice perfectly level. We took our seats. The air was electric with anticipation. On one side of the table sat the leadership of Vance Biotherapeutics, men on the verge of a life-altering payday. On the other side sat the senior partners of Blackwood Capital, wolves about to enjoy their feast. And I sat between them, the shepherdess who had led both flocks to the slaughterhouse. Harrison Croft, the managing partner of Blackwood, a man with the cold, predatory stillness of a great white shark, kicked off the proceedings. "Gentlemen, a momentous day. The culmination of 6 months of tireless work. Our analysis suggests that Vance Biotherapeutics is a unique and valuable asset, and we are prepared to finalize the acquisition today. But before we proceed to the signing, our tradition dictates a final summary of the due diligence from our lead analyst. Ms. Vance, the floor is yours." I stood up and walked to the head of the table. Every eye in the room was on me. The presentation remote felt cool and solid in my hand. I took a deep breath, and the show began. For the first 15 minutes, I was everything they wanted me to be. I delivered a flawless, glowing review of the company. I praised their market strategy, their robust profit margins, their innovative corporate culture. I used their own buzzwords back at them: synergy, paradigm shift, value creation. I watched as my father and brother visibly relaxed, their smug smiles widening. I was confirming their genius, validating their legacy. "The financial health of this company is, on the surface, unimpeachable," I stated, bringing the first section to a close. Then I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a fraction of a second too long. "However," I continued, and the word landed like a stone in a silent pool, "our deep dive analysis into the operational budget for your R&D pipeline has uncovered significant and deeply concerning anomalies." I clicked the remote. The slide behind me changed from a graph of soaring profits to a complex, damning flowchart. It appears that over the last 5 years, approximately 34% of the capital allocated for clinical trials has been systematically diverted through a network of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. A nervous murmur rippled through the room. My father's smile froze on his face. "That is a proprietary tax mitigation structure," he snapped, his voice tight. It's aggressive but perfectly legal. Your analysts are clearly out of their depth. Are they? I asked, turning a page in my report. Because our analysis shows that these funds were not reinvested. They were used to purchase a G5 jet, to service the mortgage on a villa in Tuscany, and most recently, to cover a 7-figure gambling debt incurred by your son, Andrew, at a private casino in Macau. Andrew went white as a sheet. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. For the first time, he was truly seeing me. This is slander, my father roared, slamming his fist on the table. It's forensic accounting. I corrected him calmly. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the wire transfer records. But financial malfeasance is only a symptom of the disease. The real question is, what was this misappropriated money meant to hide? The answer, gentlemen, is failed science. For the next half an hour, I became a vengeful angel of data. I walked them, slide by painstaking slide, through the statistical fallacies of their entire drug pipeline. I showed them how trials were cut short to hide long-term side effects. I showed them how patient data was manipulated to create results that were statistically impossible. I demonstrated, with cold, irrefutable mathematics, that their next generation of miracle drugs was a complete and utter fiction. The entire future value of this company, the value that Blackwood Capital is prepared to pay billions for, is based on a lie, I concluded, my voice ringing with a terrible clarity. The Blackwood partners looked apoplectic. Harrison Croft was staring at my father with an expression of pure, murderous rage. This is a conspiracy, Andrew stammered, finding his voice at last. A single, disgruntled researcher, perhaps. It's isolated, is it? I asked softly. I looked from my brother's terrified face to my father's apoplectic one. Was it an isolated incident 15 years ago, when you faked the clinical trial data for Vancitrex? The name of their flagship drug hung in the air like a death sentence. And now, I said, turning to address the entire room, for the final exhibit. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen filled with a scanned copy of a handwritten memo signed by my father. The subject line, Vancitrex Trial, Data Optimization. Alongside it, I displayed the original data logs from Dr. Eris Thorne, showing the real patient outcomes, the neurological damage, the catastrophic side effects, the deaths. This company, I announced, my voice resonating with the power of absolute truth, is not just financially corrupt. It is morally bankrupt. Its foundational product is a fraud perpetrated on the FDA and the public. You are not acquiring a biotech firm. You are acquiring a crime scene. The room exploded. The Blackwood partners were on their feet, shouting at their lawyers. The Vance board members were staring at my father in stunned, horrified silence. My father, his face a mask of purple rage, finally found his voice. He pointed a trembling finger at me. Who are you to do this? After I gave you everything. I finally let the mask of the impartial analyst drop. I walked from the head of the table until I was standing directly in front of him, looking down at the man who had shattered my dreams without a second thought. Gave me everything? I said, my voice low and shaking with a decade of suppressed fury. You stole my future to pay for his mistakes. You told me my life's work was a poor investment. You dismissed me, you discarded me, and you wrote me off. You taught me that the only thing that matters in this world is the cold, hard data. You taught me about the strategic reallocation of assets. I leaned in closer. Well, I've just conducted the ultimate strategic reallocation. I've reallocated your assets from a multi-billion-dollar net worth to a $0 valuation. I've reallocated your reputation from visionary scientist to criminal fraudster. And I've reallocated your future from a comfortable retirement to a series of federal penitentiaries. He stared at me, the name finally catching in his throat. Eleanor. You should have let me finish my PhD, father, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I was always very, very good at math. I turned my back on him, on all of them, and walked out of the boardroom. I didn't look back at the chaos, at the ruin, at the implosion of the House of Vance. My work was done. The fallout was biblical. The acquisition was dead, of course. The SEC and FDA launched sweeping investigations. The stock became worthless overnight. My father and brother were arrested, their faces splashed across every major news outlet. They were buried under an avalanche of shareholder lawsuits, regulatory fines, and criminal charges. They lost everything. 6 months later, I sat in a small office at MIT, across from the dean of the biology department. Between us on the table was a check. Using my 7-figure bonus from Blackwood, a reward for saving the firm from investing in a criminal enterprise, I was endowing the Dr. Eris Thorne Grant for Integrity in Scientific Research. It would fully fund, every year, a promising PhD candidate who, like me, believed that the truth was more important than profit. I had lost a family, but I had reclaimed my name. I had walked through the fire of their creation and emerged not burned, but forged. My ledger was finally, perfectly balanced.